The show values as options for a pivot table are mentioned in other videos in this series. For example, the video on displaying counts illustrates the common options of showing counts as percentages of row totals, column totals, or grand totals. These particular options are also useful for summarizations besides counts, particularly sums, and there are quite a few other show values as options as well. This video discusses the various options and what they mean. Actually, a short video is probably not sufficient to explain all of the options in detail. So if you really want to understand the options, how to use them, and why you would want to use them, the workbook you see here is valuable. It uses the same online purchases dataset you have seen before, and it contains 15 pivot table sheets, one for each of the show values as options. I will discuss each briefly here, but you can study them at your own pace by going through this workbook on your own. Here is the basic pivot table, showing sums of total spent by customer region and customer gender. If I right-click any number, I can see the show values as options. The default option, the one you see here, is the no calculation option. The next three options are the same as I mentioned for counts, but they are now percentages of sum of total spent. These are arguably the three options you will use most often. Here are percentages of the grand total. Here are percentages of column totals, where percentages in each column add to 100%. Here are percentages of row totals, where percentages in each row add to 100%. Here are percentages of a base item you can specify, in this case the Northeast region. The next three options use the term parent. Typically this is the outer of two fields in either the rows or the columns area, so these options make sense only when there are multiple fields in at least one of these areas. Here are percentages of parent row totals, where the parent is the outer row field, customer region. The text box explains what these percentages represent, using the red and green cells for illustration. Similarly, here are the percentages of parent column totals, where the parent is the outer column field, purchase time. Here are percentages of parent totals where you get to specify the parent field. The only one that makes sense in this pivot table is the outer row field, customer region. The next two options display differences between each item and a base item you specify. Here is each dollar difference relative to the corresponding south total. Here are the same differences, but expressed as percentages. For example, the difference between the northeast and south totals is about 196% of the south total. In other words, this difference is about twice the south total. The next two options display running totals for any specified base field. This is especially useful when the base field is a date field, grouped in some way as shown here. Here are monthly running totals expressed in dollars. Here are the same running totals, but expressed as percentages of column totals. The next two options show ranks, one to the number of categories, for any selected base field. Here are the ranks, where 1 corresponds to the smallest value and 4 corresponds to the largest value. Here are the same ranks, but in the opposite order, 1 largest and 4 smallest. The last option, index, is pretty obscure. Microsoft claims that it represents the relative importance of the items, and you can even find formulas for calculating these indexes, but I don't recommend this option. Here is good news. If you have a pivot chart and you make any of these show values as changes to the associated pivot table, the pivot chart will update in the same way. Now that you know essentially what these options do, you can use them to display pivot table values in a way that is most enlightening for the story you are trying to tell.